Galatians chapter 4, verse 21. Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. But the one of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through promise. Now this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. For it is written, Rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and cry aloud, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than those of the one who has a husband. Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of promise, but just as at the time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so also it is now. But what does the Scripture say? Cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman. Okay, that's Galatians chapter 4, beginning with 21 and ending with verse 31. Hello, Finding Grace. Today we will cover Genesis chapter 21 and 22. Genesis chapter 21 and 22, beginning with 21 verse 1 through 7. Sarah gave birth to Isaac even though she was old. Isaac's name means he laughs because Sarah laughed, also Abraham earlier, but Sarah laughed and that became his name. God wanted him to be called Isaac. Abraham circumcised his son when he was 8 days old, just as God had commanded him to do. Jews today still do this. Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. Obviously, everyone will laugh because she was so old yet bore a child. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned. Weaned means to eat things other than your mother's milk. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. This was Ishmael who was laughing. Abraham and Sarah's lack of faith in chapter 16 is still causing problems. It is not explained why Ishmael laughed at Isaac, but the relationship is clearly complicated now. So she said to Abraham, Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not be heir with my son, Isaac. Abraham was displeased at this because, he was his father. But God said to Abraham, Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named, and I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. I mentioned earlier that God blessed Ishmael, even though Abraham sinned, because the Lord had made a promise to Abraham to bless his descendants. And Ishmael is able to receive part of that blessing, that promise that God made to Abraham. Ishmael would produce the Muslim nations. Beginning in verse 14, So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, and sent her and Ishmael away to wander in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Hagar moves about a bow shot away because she didn't want to watch Ishmael die, probably of starvation, probably of thirst. She lifted up her voice and wept. In verse 17, and God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God stayed with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. In verse 22, back to Abraham, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my descendants or with my prosperity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. With the land where you have sojourned. Abimelech means Malik is father, or it can also mean my father is king. Phicol means strong. It is interesting that they notice how God is clearly with Abraham. And so Abraham agreed and swore. Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. Abimelech said he didn't know about it until just now. Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 female lambs of the flock apart to give to Abimelech, to be a witness that he dug a well. The place was called Beersheba, which means well of the oath. Abimelech and Phicol left to return to the land of the Philistines. Abraham also planted a tamarisk tree and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. He sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. Beginning in chapter 22, verse 1, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. The Lord said, Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Moriah also means chosen by Jehovah. In verse 3, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Verse 4 mentions the day Abraham was to sacrifice Isaac was the 3rd day. This is likely a reference to Jesus, who was sacrificed on the 3rd day. Abraham then said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come back to you. Abraham's story is a story of faith and lack of faith. Here Abraham has faith that he will return with Isaac alive, even though the Lord told him to sacrifice him. Abraham gave the wood of the burnt offering to Isaac to carry, while he carried the fire and the knife. Isaac asked where the lamb was for the burnt offering. Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. Again, Abraham is displaying his faith that the Lord won't actually force him to kill his son Isaac. In verse 9, when they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am," just like before. We see the Lord called Abraham twice, likely trying to get him to stop immediately. God does not actually want him to kill his son. He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. Thankfully, God does not actually want Abraham to kill his son. This was only a test. And by the way, in the Bible, God hates human sacrifices. Coincidentally, there is a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. Abraham offers the ram instead of his son. This is another reason why the Jewish religion doesn't really make any sense until Christ died on the cross. I don't know how Jews to this day who are spiritual or religious, how they come across this and don't think of Jesus. Isaac's obedience in the face of unjust judgment reminds me of Jesus facing the judgment of God. Remember, he prayed for the cup to be taken from him, but he remained obedient like a sheep led to the slaughter. Think about how Abraham felt. Abraham, who waited his whole life waiting for a son who was promised by God, and now he must kill his only son. Jesus is the Lord's only son. We can see how Jesus felt when his father forsook him. We can see how the Lord felt by turning from Jesus, even though he was innocent. In verse 15, Abraham named the place, "The Lord will provide." Moses makes the point that while Genesis was being written, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided" was still an expression. Verse 17, "And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, 'By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice.'" Notice it says nations, not nation, and offspring, not offsprings. Galatians chapter 3, verses 6 through 9. "Just as Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, 'In you shall all the nations be blessed.' So then those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith." Okay. Galatians chapter 3, verse 16. "Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring." It does not say, "and to offsprings," referring to many, but referring to one, "and to your offspring, who is Christ." Abraham will primarily bless the nations by his offspring, not offsprings. His eventual offspring will be Jesus, who will be sacrificed for the sins of the church. Verse 19, "Abraham returned to his young men with Isaac, just like Abraham believed. They went back to Beersheba." The chapter ends with Abraham being told that Milcah had bore children to his brother Nahor. First there was Uz, Buz, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chels, Hazo, Fildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. It also mentions Bethuel fathered Rebekah, which will be important soon. Nahor's concubine Remuah bore Teba, Gahem, Tahash, and Makkah. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you, Finding Grace. Bye-bye.